Hello, this is the front-end web development class. My name is Jeffrey. This is our first recap of our first class, which is last week. So let's take a look at what we did last week. First of all, of course, I walked everyone through how the class works. If you're interested in reading all this, I'm not going to go through it all again. But if you are interested in reading it, then this whole slide presentation is always available from this link down here, intro presentation. You've been to this page before, probably. This is the front-end web development class page. Scroll down to the very, very bottom. And there in the lower left, you can click on intro presentation to read this presentation. So yeah, that's good. Do you have a question? All right, cool. Yeah, so we talked about what front-end web development is. We talked about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and how we're not going to be talking about most of this stuff down at the bottom, plus a whole lot more that pretty much just encompasses computers and programming. Just going to be talking about HTML, CSS, JavaScript. And we talked about how HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are three parts of a whole. HTML being the most important, being the entry point for every web page, and CSS and JavaScript being the stuff that kind of sits on top of it. So yeah, let's just go through this again. Yes?
Why is HTML not considered a language?
It is. Hypertext markup language.
Programming language.
It's not considered a programming language because it doesn't have any logic inside it. It's nothing but markup. That is to say, it has just structure. It's kind of like, it's kind of like a Word document with just a whole bunch of information about like how like certain things that should be paragraphs, certain things that should be headings, certain things that should be lists. But it doesn't say like, if this is a list, then this paragraph should be so and so. Or it doesn't say anything like when you click this thing, then cause something specific to happen. It's not a full-fledged Turing-complete programming language. It's just a markup language because it's just a way to represent markup, which is kind of what it's all about. So that's why it's not considered a programming language. CSS isn't considered a programming language either, although it has certain parts of it. It's going to start to have things like variables, conditional statements, a few other sorts of interesting things down the line that make it a little bit more like a programming language, but it's still considered a style sheet markup language, which just means that it's just information on how a document should be styled, and it doesn't have a lot of logic of its own. JavaScript is the only Turing-complete language that browsers can run, so that's why HTML is not considered a programming language. But every page, when you load up that page, the first thing that happens is that your browser begins to download HTML. There's no way that you can start on a CSS file or start on JavaScript and get a full page. It always has to be HTML if the page is to be displayed. And then from there, the HTML has links out to CSS and JavaScript files. We actually only got to CSS last week. JavaScript, we're not really going to talk about for another 2 weeks, and we're not even going to talk about how to include it into a page for another 5 weeks. But JavaScript provides, like I said, the behavior for the page. So yeah, that's pretty much the lay of the land. What else? Yeah, and of course, if you haven't set up for this class, if you're new, you're coming in the second week, then you should follow these steps: fwd-setup, basically going to this purple section and reading up to get a web browser, get a text editor, get the class materials. Steps 3 and 4 are not as important right now. They'll be more important next week when we start to talk about version control and the command line. But right now, really only one or two will get you where you need to go. So, but on the topic of 4, get the class materials. If you'd like to see exactly what we wrote last week, you can get the class materials. And there's the fancy way of doing it, which is by using Git. And then there's the more rudimentary way of doing it, which is by downloading a zip file of the class materials from this last class and also the last 2 series, because it all comes in one big bundle. If you want to do that, you basically click on this link right here. It says FWD. You just click on that, and you're brought to github.com/jeffreyatw/fwd. You go here and you press the clone or download button, and you can press the download zip button to download a zip file of all of the materials from last week and the last 2 series. Or if you have GitHub Desktop, which is a GitHub program for your desktop, then you can do it that way. Or you can, if you know how to use Git, you can just run the command to clone it. Yeah, so there's that. So I'll leave it to you to go ahead and do that. if you'd like to follow along on your desktop and make some changes to last week's material, because we're going to go ahead and take a look at it pretty much right about now, unless anyone has any questions before I continue. Yeah.
Should we try to learn a little bit about Git before you talk about it in class, or is it going to be kind of rudimentary?
It's going to be very rudimentary. I'm going to talk about what version control is and how to use a command line, how to use bash, all that stuff. So no knowledge necessary coming in. You know. So, yep, indeed. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and find the materials from previous class. If you have been working on your own class materials, then go to that folder. Take a look at what you wrote last week. Go for it. I would recommend, and I'll say this again once we start on the material in about half an hour, that that for this week that you create a new folder to put new work in. You know, make it right next to the folder from last week, so you don't necessarily overwrite stuff that you worked on last week. Anyway, if you want to look at my stuff, you've probably downloaded some sort of FWD folder or zip file. You're gonna scroll. To Series 10. Open up Class 1, and you can go ahead and just double-click on index.html, and it'll probably open up a web browser. If it doesn't, then you might want to go to File, Open With, and then choose the web browser that you want to use. Or you can right-click here if you know how to do that. Open with Google Chrome. So I'm just going to go ahead and double-click on it. So here's our ugly website we made last week. It's nice and pink. It's got a green list on it. Wonderful. Great color combo. But we can start by just taking a look at the source behind this page. I could open this up in the text editor, but if I really just wanted to view the page source really quickly, I could go to just right-click and do View Page Source. Or you can go to View, Developer, View Source. At least that's in Chrome. If you're using a different browser, it might be slightly different. And this is what we wrote last week. Those numbers on the side are, of course, just line numbers provided by the browser. We didn't write every line number. We don't have to do those. But what we did write was all this stuff here. So every HTML page starts with a little message up at the top that says doc type HTML. It's basically telling the web browser that this is a modern HTML file. Then it follows along with a whole bunch of tags: HTML, head, body, etc. You'll notice that a lot of these tags come in pairs. This HTML tag, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the file, has a closing HTML tag, and then everything else inside it is part of the HTML element. So we use the term tag to refer to one of these guys, and element to refer to a pair of them and everything inside them. So when I say everything is inside them, I just mean that basically this opens and this closes, and you'll see here that there's some sort of zigzaggy indentation pattern that's going on here. And I use indentation to show that certain things are inside other things. That is to say, everything inside from lines 3 up until line 29, everything that is inside the HTML element. Everything from 4 to 5, title and link elements, are inside head. You can tell because head starts and it doesn't close until title and link are done. Then it closes the head, right? So that means that these are children of the head element. Cool. So the HTML element contains two elements all the time: head and body. Head is meant to contain some information about the page, stuff that doesn't contribute to the structure or the content of the page, but it's information about how the browser or how other sorts of robots, computers, programs, whatever, should try to consume this information. For example, the title shows up in the tab bar. You see My Crazy Website, and that's right in between the title element. Just whatever you write there is just going to show up there. And this link tag we put near the end of the class, that links to a style sheet. We wanted to apply colors and sizes and other sort of stuff to this page. And to do that, we linked a style sheet to this HTML tag. This is our HTML file. That's what caused this to become pink, to have a green list, to have a different font, to have I don't know, green, italics, bolding, all that stuff. We'll see that in a second. Sorry, I need to keep zooming in and zooming out. So that's all informational stuff. It doesn't directly affect the content of the page. What I mean by content is stuff that is meant to be understood about the page. Like I showed you that little triumvirate of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, HTML is structure or content, where everything that you need to know about the page is read out in your HTML file. Or one way or another, it's going to be represented by HTML, the stuff that you need to read and understand about the page. So all the stuff that you need to read and understand is going to be inside the body element. So the body element is usually very, very big, very deeply nested. There's a whole bunch of elements inside the body element. 9 is HTML comment. HTML comments look like bracket, bang, dash, dash, and end with dash, dash, bracket. Essentially what this means is that anything that's inside this delimiter and that delimiter is going to be completely ignored by the browser. It's just going to skip right past it. So that's a place where you can write some information that might help you or other people looking at this code to understand what's going on in the file. You know, so it's just stuff that won't show up on the site. As you can see, it doesn't show up on the site. Next up, we have My First Website. My First Website is surrounded with H1 tags. So this H1 element, My First Website, H1 stands for heading 1. There are 6 heading tags, heading 1 through 6. And you use them to basically have subheadings and then subheadings and then subheadings until you reach level 6, at which point, if you really need like a 7th level heading, something really, really small, you might reconsider why you're using headings in the first place. So as you can see here, just by virtue of this My First Website being inside an H1 element, it becomes very large. It becomes larger and bolder than the other stuff on the page. But that's not something that you should depend upon. Just because it's an H1 element doesn't mean that it necessarily has to be big. And just because something is big on the page doesn't mean that it's an H1 element. The whole concept of big and bold and all these sorts of visual terms are things that you can completely take over using CSS. So we're using an H1 in this case because it is the title of our page. If we had something that came right after it that was even bigger, or bigger than the heading, but it didn't look like a heading, like it was some sort of introductory paragraph, or I don't know, something larger than that for some reason, for whatever reason, that doesn't mean it's a heading. It just means that it's really big text. It could be a paragraph, it could be a list of stuff, it could be a whole bunch of different HTML elements. What I'm getting at is the largeness that you get from using an H1 tag isn't something that you need to depend on to make stuff on the page big. That's where CSS comes in. Anyway, I'll go through this. P stands for paragraph. They're very common tags. You're going to see them all over the place. Wherever you see multiple lines of text that resemble sort of a human sentence or groups of sentences, you use a paragraph. And when you have 2 paragraphs next to each other, they show up on their own line with a little bit of spacing in between them. So as you can see, we've got paragraph 1, and I've got paragraph 2. Paragraph is on a single line, whereas this paragraph is on 4 different lines. There's no difference. I could have put everything that I've got highlighted on a single line, but it just wouldn't have been as easy to read. So I start to break things out if I feel like the lines are going to get really long. When you're writing code, you want to make sure that your lines aren't very, very long. If you've got something that's, say, over like 100 lines long, 100 characters long on a single line, you might consider if you could break it up. The good thing about HTML is that no matter how many spaces or how much indentation or how many line breaks you put between certain things, it's not going to affect how the page renders it. It's not going to insert, like, if you were writing something into a regular text box, like if you were blogging or writing a Facebook post or whatever, and you put in some enters, those enters would show up. And that's those platforms, Facebook, WordPress, whatever, doing you a favor. In HTML, no favors. You can, if you want to have spacing between lines, then you need to surround them in different elements, like paragraph and then paragraph again. That's where the spacing comes into play. And we're going to talk a lot more about the spacing in this class and what that spacing is actually called and how you can control it and all that sort of stuff. So in paragraph, we have some text, and then right next to the text, we have an A element. So another thing worth noting is that this paragraph contains just like essentially 2 children, quote unquote, but only one of them is an element. So this element A is kind of the sibling to this text. So you can think of them as like 2 different nodes. That's kind of the more technical term for what's going on here. When you have regular plain text sitting as a sibling, that is to say, right next to, other stuff, then they're siblings of one another, but it's just plain text. It's not an element all of its own. The element that is inside is the paragraph, which the A is also inside. So I hope that kind of makes sense in terms of nesting. Of course, as you can see, the indentation makes that very apparent what's going on. So this A has some weird stuff inside this opening tag. Look how long this single opening tag is. It's a lot longer than P, or even body, or title. It's got A, target, blank, href, https, noisebridge.net. It's got a whole bunch of stuff, and that's just the opening tag. And then inside that tag, we have more text, and then we have the closing A tag. So what does this A do? A stands for anchor. The reasoning behind that is that in the old ages of the internet, people used A tags as anchors on the page, meaning places that you could scroll to and possibly bookmark, so you could come to later. It would automatically scroll you to that point. People don't use that as much nowadays. It's not a very common tactic, but you can still do it. But when an anchor element has an href, which stands for hypertext reference, then it functions as a hyperlink. And a hyperlink, of course, is highlighted text that you can click to go somewhere else on the internet. So you go ahead and click noisebridge.net. It's going to bring you to noisebridge.net. Now, pop quiz. Is it going to bring you to noisebridge.net because we wrote this text here? Yes or no? No. The answer is no. It's going to noisebridge.net because that's the href, the hypertext reference. Whatever we put in here is where it's going to take you. So does that mean that we could change this to something like apple.com or whatever else and click it, and it would still take you to noisebridge.net, right? So there you go. And that, of course, means that you don't have to have a URL here. You can put any text you want in there. Obviously, you know, when you read an article, you've got a lot of highlighted stuff. Those are just anchor tags with an href to somewhere, and what you see on the page is what's in between the opening and closing tags. Yes?
Is that represent the noise break link? Is that supposed to help it, like advertise for it in any kind of manner?
Advertising?
As other noise break. Why did you put it there? I mean, I'm
Well,
curious now.
the reason for it is because I want someone to read that my favorite website is noisebridge.net. What I want someone to see versus what I want them to click on is a little bit different. For example, the N is uppercase. You don't see an http://. All you really see is noisebridge.net. But here, this actually goes to https://noisebridge.net. I can change this to whatever I want. The difference is that whatever I type in here is just what's going to show up on the page. See? So that's still going to take me to Noisebridge because the href is https://noisebridge.net. But now it just says Noisebridge. Or I could say a cool place. Whatever, you know. And I click that, it's still going to take me to Noisebridge. It just changes what shows up on the page. Okay? Cool. So there you go. By the way, these are developer tools. We're going to learn how to use those today. Okay, so that's our two paragraphs. Next up, we have our ordered list. Much more common are unordered lists. So we have a little comment here talking about the difference between UL and OL. UL stands for unordered list, and OL stands for ordered list. A better way of thinking of them is that an unordered list is a bulleted list, and an ordered list is a numbered list. So, you know, you can think of numbers providing a certain kind of order. So as you can see here, because this is an OL, every LI, which stands for list item, has a number behind it, 1, 2, and 3. I can't even highlight this text. I'm trying to highlight it. It's not letting me do that. That's because that text is not in our HTML, 1, 2, and 3. That text is generated by virtue of the fact that each one of these is inside a list item. For every list item inside an ordered list, there's going to be a new number appearing behind this text here. So list item element number 1, list item element number 2, and number 3, they all get little things behind them. That means that if you're writing HTML, you should never have to write 1.2.3. Or you should never have to have little dashes like dash, 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 or asterisk, 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 or bullet point, bullet point, bullet point. You should never see that in your HTML because what you're writing is a list of sorts. So you want to use the OL or the UL tags and make each one of those things a list item. If they don't show up the way that you want them to, like you don't like the indentation that the ordered or unordered list give you, or you don't like the numbering system that you can use, there's ways of changing that. But you still want to consider that whenever you're making anything that resembles a list, even if there are no bullet points or are no numbers, consider that if there's a specific like order to, or if there's a specific just list of things one after another that don't seem like paragraphs, that just seem like one thing coming after another, that's probably a list. So they're pretty common. They're more common than you think than you'd think. And finally, that's it. That's all that we put inside our body. So our body tag closes, our HTML tag, our HTML closing tag is here, and that's the end of our document. So there we are. Questions? Okay. Oh yeah, let's talk about CSS. So at the top of this page, we have a link element. Now, link is not to be confused with hyperlink. What I mean by hyperlink is one of these things where when you click it, it takes you somewhere else. That's a hyperlink. And we use the anchor tag for that. We use the A tag. A tags are for hyperlinks. So what's a link tag? Unrelated. What it does, well, even though it has an href, just like the A tag does, what the link tag does is it essentially links up this HTML file to other files. It essentially tells the browser, depending on what the relation is, and that's what rel stands for, rel equals something or other, depending on what the relation is, the browser is going to treat these files, these related linked files, a certain way. When you specify a rel of style sheet, it's going to load up style.css, and it's going to apply it to the page as a style sheet. So you go ahead and you click style.css. Hey, how's it going? And style.css looks like this. Might be a little better for me to open this up in my text editor because my browser doesn't seem to give this syntax highlighting. That is to say, it doesn't color different parts of it differently to make it a little bit more readable. So let's go ahead and open this up in our text editor and look at it that way. So for me, I can just double click on style.css and it'll open up in my in my text editor. If that doesn't work for you, then just go ahead and open with whatever text editor you like to use, or go ahead and use file, open with, and choose it from there. So here's style.css. Looks a lot more yellow and orange. But what we've got here is a list of rules that determine how the page should look. What we're saying here, we've got 3 rules. This CSS file has 3 rules. Here's rule number 3, rule number 2, rule number 1. Each one of these rules has some parts of it. The very beginning is what's known as the selector. This, these are selectors. What they're doing is they're saying that they're essentially telling the browser to select something on the page. And the pattern here means HTML essentially means that we're going to select any HTML element on the page. This is going to select any A element. This is going to select any LI element. When I say any element, I mean all elements. All elements that are LIs, it's going to make all of them look this way. So if there were more than one HTML element on the page, which there is not, there's only one, but if there were, then all of them would look this way. Same with A, same with LI. So it's just selecting all of them. We're going to talk a lot more about selectors today as well. So the rest of it is pretty understandable if you know English, right? I mean, the HTML document, the HTML element, which is the entire page here, everything, is going to have a background. Sorry, I keep going the wrong way. It's going to have a background of pink, and it's going to have a font family of sans serif. Here's a little comment in my CSS. This is stuff, of course, just like in HTML, where the browser is just going to ignore it entirely. But this is a little note for us to say that sans serif refers to fonts like Helvetica that are a little bit more modern looking, not like Times New Roman that have little serifs all over them. So when we say font family sans serif, it's going to fall back to some sort of font like Helvetica, depending on the operating system. Not every operating system has Helvetica, for example. Mac OS does, Windows does not. Arial is on Windows, which is a very similar thing to Helvetica. On Linux, there's a whole bunch of different free type sorts of things. I don't know what the defaults are. It depends. On Android, it's Roboto. You know, on iOS, it's Helvetica Neue. You know, it depends. There's a whole bunch of different ones, but they all pretty much look similar to each other. Text decoration none means there's not going to be any underline. Underline is referred to as text decoration. So when we say none, we're essentially undoing the default text decoration of every link, which is to underline it. And then for every list item, we're specifying a color of green. It's referring to the color of the text, not the background color, which is background or background color. Font style for whether it should be italic or not, and font weight for how bold it should be. When I say how bold it should be, there's more than just normal and bold. There's also light. Basically, there are the way that it's done is that you can go from 100 units. You can basically go 100 to I think 900, and everywhere in between. That's how a lot of typographers refer to different font weights. And there are some fonts that have like 9 different weights. Some very, very thin, some very, very bold, or very black, or whatever you want to call them. So yeah, that's how that works. And all these three things combined together create this green, italic, bold list item series. Cool. So as you can see, pink background. As you can see, this link doesn't have an underline under it, and here's green, italic, bold list items. So that's how all that stuff fits together. Another thing worth noting is that the reason that these two work together, if you couldn't get this to work last week, maybe it was because you didn't save them in the same folder together. Index.html and style.css are in the same folder. They don't have to be in the same folder. But if they're in a different folder, then you need to specify that right here. All I'm doing right here is just referring to a file name, style.css. But if it's in a different folder or on a different website or whatever else, you either need to provide the full URL, HTTP, whatever, or you need to refer to some relative file paths, which is stuff we'll probably talk about next week when we talk about the command line. File paths in terms of like .. and you know, styles / something.css or something like that. Basically how slashes work. So we'll understand all that stuff probably next week. So yeah, you know, but if we save those two things, we combine them, we have them all, you know, load up, and then that means that the browser was able to load up index.html and find style.css and load them both together and apply them to each other. So there's that. Any questions?
There was a file in there, .md. What was that?
Dot what? Dot who?
.md. I thought I saw a file in your folder.
Oh, assignment.md. Yeah. So I added this a few days later as the assignment for this class. So I usually just store the assignment along with the other stuff. MD files stand for Markdown. Markdown is a very easy way to write stuff that ends up looking like this. I've got different level headings, different level things here. I've got things that look like little bits of code there. Markdown is kind of an easier, more human-readable way of making documents that can easily be styled by things like GitHub readmes or somewhere else. It looks kind of like this. This is, of course, a lot more easy to read than HTML, but it's a lot less extensible than HTML. There are not as many elements that you can use. There's not a focus on being able to create a very complex nested structure. It's all really just for kind of making your README files or your text files a little bit nicer from a style perspective. And of course, the style differs based on the website that runs it. Like GitHub makes it look like this, although actually GitHub just changed their font, so I have no control over that. Now the font's different. That's fine. It's still readable. But then when I preview it on my desktop, it looks like this. Very different, right? I mean, it's still the same content, but it's using different file sizes, font sizes, and everything. So MD is not really, it's not something that can be understood by a browser, but it's something where you can upload to a place like GitHub to make your READMEs look very nice and readable. So that's what an MD file is, and that's why you'll see that from time to time in the class materials that you download. Cool. You had a question?
Yeah, in the library, where is all of the elements contained?
Where are all the elements contained? In the HTML file. So I opened up index.html, and here they all are.
I mean, there's more than that.
Oh, you're looking for a list of elements. Yeah.
List and what they do.
Yeah. So if you search up MDN HTML, and you want to click right here, HTML element reference. MDN is your best friend. It's a website called the Mozilla Developer Network. It's run by Mozilla, that makes Firefox. and it's the best reference for all things HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in one place. It is an up-to-date, trustworthy, very well put together, very standards compliant, reference for all things. And so if you're interested in learning about what every single element in HTML does, you go to this page here, and you can read up on what every single one of them does. I'm not going to go through every HTML element until possibly the very end of the class if I have time. It's not important to understand what every HTML element does. I don't understand what every HTML element does. It's not really important. There's only a few of them that you should know, and I pretty much listed them off last week. Paragraphs, headings, list items, body, head, HTML, the stuff that you see here. So beyond that, not that important. But we'll talk about a few more throughout the class. But I'm not going to be doing like a very, I'm not going to quiz you on all of them. It's not important. Cool. So it's 8. Time to start our new stuff. Hi. This is the front-end web development class. My name is Jeffrey. Welcome to week 2. We're going to talk about CSS a little bit more in depth today. Before making a hard turn into JavaScript for like the next month or so. We're going to talk a little bit more about CSS to the point that you should understand it before we get into more programming JavaScript-related stuff. Because well, I wouldn't say before JavaScript came CSS. They were both kind of introduced at similar times. But it's kind of important to understand a little bit more about HTML and how it's laid out, and understanding more about CSS will help us kind of conflate those two things. Let me see here. So the first thing that I want to do in this class is introduce to you the developer tools, something that I kind of didn't have time to do last week. As always, I recommend that you use the latest version of whatever browser you like. Don't use Internet Explorer 10 or below. Don't use Safari 7 or Safari 6 or whatever. If you've got a very old Mac laptop that you can't upgrade to the latest version of Mac OS, try not to use Safari. Use the latest version of Chrome or Firefox instead. But either way, the latest version of any browser will probably contain developer tools. So to open up these developer tools in pretty much any web browser, you have to control-click or right-click or whatever menu click, however, two-finger click, however you get this menu to open, and go to the Inspect button. If you can't get that menu to open, another way of doing it, in Chrome at least, is to go to View, Developer, and Developer Tools. It might also say Inspect Element if you're using Firefox. Either way, Inspect is what you're looking for. The easiest way to open up, or at least the easiest mouse-related way, you can also do Option-Command-I, which is I've never memorized, to open up these developer tools here. So, if you have any questions, you can ask. Do you need any help? No? Yeah, all good? Cool. 1 second. Forgot to drink water. Okay. Really quick, I'm going to see if I have any questions online. Whoops. Screenshots for the code for learning. Can I provide screenshots of the code for the extra credit solution from last week's homework? I can't provide screenshots, but I'm pretty sure that in the solution for last week's homework, that if you go down to the bottom and click solution, you should see pretty much all of the extra credit stuff in this document. So it's all there. I don't think you need a screenshot though. Okay. And why the href tag is there an A before noisebridge.net? I think that I answered that question at this point. The idea is that href is part of the opening tag, and then you've got the text that shows up on the screen, then you've got the closing tag. So there's that. Oh, okay. Sorry I didn't get to that earlier. Okay, so you should probably have this open. If you used Chrome or if you've got another thing, it might look somewhat like this. The idea here, let me zoom in a little bit to make it easier to see. The idea here is that you've got a few things in this main panel. You should be on Elements panel. It might be called something else in different browsers. It's probably usually called Elements. But what's going on here is that you see what looks very much like the source of the page. If you did view source, you'd see something similar. But it's a little interactive. You can go ahead and start to highlight certain things within this elements list, and the corresponding elements will be highlighted on the page. So, you go into paragraph here, you go into this OL, you go into LI, and as you can see, it's highlighting over the different elements based on where my mouse is. So that's pretty cool. It provides you a little bit of an interactive, nested structure for your stuff. And it explains in very easy detail why it's important to open and close HTML tags, why indentation might help you understand a little bit more about how the page is laid out, because now you see that the title and link are actually inside this head element, right? Cool. So that's some cool stuff. Every element here, you can go ahead and delete it. You can hide it. You can edit its text. You can edit it as HTML. You can copy them. You can do other sorts of stuff. You can just double-click to edit the text. Double-click here to edit the element name. Double-click on target or href to change the attributes around. And the page doesn't even need to reload. Any changes you make immediately just show up there. So it's a really great tool just to experiment and see how things work. The cool thing, you can make changes on a page you're working on. You can make changes on any page on the internet. So let's hope that the New York Times today isn't too depressing. That's depressing. But okay, here's this advertisement that showed up here. I love the New York Times. I've subscribed to them for a while. Then I just stopped. But I get a lot of advertisements. Oh, I was gonna. It went away. Do I have? No. No. Everything is depressing. Putin here. John Cho's cool. How many articles do I have left? It should eventually kick me out of this or tell me how many I have left. Well, whatever. Let's assume that I have a big thing on the page that I don't want to see. So let's assume, say, that I don't want this header at the top to show up anymore. This little header that follows me around, I don't care about it, so I want to get rid of it. I can inspect it, and I can say, oh, this thing is called the masthead here, right? I'm going to go ahead and just delete it. There it goes. Sulu is gay. Who knew? So, you know, that's something you can do on any page on the internet. You can just go ahead and modify it. And this is pretty much the basis behind, you know, JavaScript, Grease Monkey, or user scripts that you can install, like ad blockers or whatever else, to make your browsing experience different. Now, is this hacking? No, you're not really hacking into a different computer. I mean, it's hacking in the noise bridge term of, like, you know, doing things a cool alternative way, but it's not actually changing around what anybody else sees. You are not making changes anywhere except on your local version of the page that's been loaded up. The moment you refresh, then all of a sudden that header comes right back, right? Because it's gone ahead and loaded all the new stuff from the internet. But it's a great place to make experimental changes. You know, just move stuff around, drag this list item down to the bottom. There we go. I just, you know, rearranged it. Do whatever you want, just for the sake of experimentation. It's a lot easier than having to go back and forth between the browser and the text editor and save and reload, and save and reload, just for little things, just to see how you experiment. So I very highly recommend that you keep these developer tools open 100% of the time that you are making websites. I get a lot of people who come up to me with questions about the assignment, questions about their personal projects, or whatever else, and they're saying, I don't know why this thing isn't showing up down there. I did all that I could, blah, blah, blah. And I said, have you been using your developer tools? And they go, oh, I forgot. So if you are developing without your developer tools, it's kind of like you're building a house without your house building tools. You don't want to do that, right? So please keep your developer tools open as you develop. Very important. It's like a cheat sheet for the internet. It really helps you out tremendously. Okay? So we talked about the HTML in our elements panel here. But on the right, we also have our styles tab, and computed styles and event listeners we won't talk about. As you can see, as I highlight certain stuff on the page, like HTML, or I highlight this A here, or I highlight this LI, you'll see that these styles listed out change. On the right, this LI has a color of green, font style of italic, font weight of bold. If that looks familiar, that's because we wrote it on line 11 of style.css. That's what it says right there. So if you're ever wondering if your styles are being applied the proper way, this is the place to do it. Look right here. You know, so let's go over to line 11 of style.css. There we go. Bam. LI and all that stuff shows up right there. So that's a great way of seeing that your HTML applies. Now, there are a few ways that this helps you out as well. Remember that with A, we set text decoration to none. We wanted to get rid of the underline. But it looks like here that there was another rule, a WebKit any link, whatever that means, that says color is WebKit link, whatever that means, cursor is auto, whatever that means, text decoration is underlined. You see how it's crossed out? It's crossed out because we wrote a CSS rule that overrides it. This is the really cool part about CSS. You can write rules that override other rules that come before it. But where does this rule come from? Is this in some other file that I didn't show you? Did I write this? Did I prepare this for a class? No. This is part of something called the user agent style sheet. And that's a fancy term for, user agent is a fancy term for web browser. So whenever you hear user agent, just think of web browser, the thing you're using. It is the agent for the user to browse the web, right? So the user agent style sheet is a style sheet that comes built in to your web browser. If it were not for the user agent style sheet, headings wouldn't show up as big by default, links wouldn't be blue or underlined, list items wouldn't have bullet points behind them, all that sort of stuff. All that default stuff that you get right out the box without doing any CSS styling is CSS. It's just CSS not written by you, it's CSS provided by the browser. There are a lot of style sheets out there that what they do is they undo everything that the user agent style sheet does. So you don't have to undo it yourself. They're called normalized files or resets specifically. So a CSS reset basically undoes everything that a user agent style sheet does, so you can start completely from scratch, not depending on anything in particular, which is sometimes helpful if you want complete control. But it's usually not necessary. But in this case, we did want to get rid of underlines here, so we just said text decoration none in line 7 of our style.css, and it overrode the user agent style sheet text decoration right there. So that's pretty cool. That's worth understanding. Yep, and HTML is background tape, font family, sans serif. Another cool thing is that if you want to see the before and after changes that you've made, see these little checkboxes that show up? You can just click them, and it'll toggle that property. So my font family declaration here, all of a sudden that's the default text, default font, and this is the sans serif font. Serif, sans serif. Cool. So those checkboxes should show up for you as well. You should be able to just toggle them on and off. And if you want to change the rule around, then there you go. You can do it. Yeah.
Are the toggles useful for kind of tracing what the cascade is, or is there a better way to go about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for example, when we're talking about cascading style sheets, we're talking about how a rule at a top level element will cascade down into its children. So one example of that is this font family rule, where we're applying it on the HTML and everything cascades down inside it. So if I uncheck font family here, then I take a look at H1, nothing inherits from it. But if I check this and I look at H1 again, see how it inherits from HTML, font family, Comic Sans MS, and that's highlighted. So you're able to see all the inherited rules here, and you can uncheck them here if you want as well. But it affects the entire page. So yeah, that's how cascading works. How a rule set up all the way up in the HTML will cascade down to this H1 or everywhere else on the page, and you are able to see all the rules on this element and all the rules on anything that comes outside of it that cascades down into it. So yeah. All right. That cool? Does anyone have any questions so far about how the developer tools work? What they're showing to you? How they what it all means? Any questions online? Okay. I'm taking a drink of water. I had a little cold over the weekend, and I need to hydrate. Okay. So let's talk about what we've come here for. We want to learn about, let's talk about the box model first. Yeah, okay. So box model, that sounds frightening. Here's a little hint. Here's something that you should know. Every element on the page is a box. Here's a box. Here's a hidden box. Here's a box. Here's a box. Here's a box. Here's a box. Check out all these boxes. Not squares, not rectangles. Well, they're rectangles, but they're boxes. Every single one of these things is a box. And this is a very, very important way to understand kind of how CSS works. There was an article that was put out recently like talking about when did CSS click for you? Because although CSS seems pretty straightforward now, it's a hellish language to fully understand. There's a lot of really crazy ways of doing a lot of different things. It gets really hairy really quickly. But one thing that'll really help you understand it is that every single one of these elements on the page is a box. It's a rectangle. It's a rhombus. It's something that you can take there and you can do things to that box. What sort of things can we do to this box? Well, let's say that we want this heading not, okay, before I do that, let's talk about the two different kinds of boxes that we've got. There are two different kinds of boxes generally. There are a few more different kinds. We don't have to worry about those. Two general kinds of boxes. There are block boxes and there are inline block boxes. I'm going to stop saying box now and go back to element. There are block elements and inline elements. So what's the difference between block elements and inline elements? First of all, let's count the block elements on the page. Here's one. Here's one. HTML, body, H1, paragraph, paragraph again, not A, OL, LI, and that's it. Every single element on this page except for A is a block element. So what does that mean? What it means essentially is that it has a few characteristics. First thing is that it stretches as far as it can horizontally. It has as much of a width as it can be given. So as you can see, this H1 starts almost at the very left of the page and goes all the way to almost the very right of the page. This paragraph does the same thing. So does this paragraph. So even though the text inside this heading and inside this paragraph doesn't stretch all the way across, you know, it's just 3 words, my first website, the heading itself stretches as far as it can. The box drawn around the text is a lot longer than the actual text itself. That's one thing about a block element. The next thing you should know about a block element is that it pushes all other elements above and below it onto their own line. That is to say, by default, you're not going to see anything to the right of my first website. This heading, this paragraph, and the paragraph following it are all on their own lines. Yes?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the last 2 points?
I'm on the second point right now.
Okay, including this one and the one before, when you get that.
So the first point was that every block element stretches as far as it can. Okay? Second point is that every block element pushes everything below and before and after it onto their own line. It starts a new line. So, you know, if you're ever wondering, how do I space stuff out? Well, you create block elements that kind of space themselves out from other block elements, right? So H1, paragraph, P, whatever, there's these 3 things and there's space between them and everything. They're not sitting right next to each other. So that's block elements. Yes?
Are the orange lines padding?
They're margin. I'll get to that very soon. So inside this paragraph, we have this A element. And this A element is also a rectangle. It's a box. But as you can see, it does not adhere to those 2 rules that I just told you about. It does not stretch all the way across the page, right? Or does not stretch all the way across its container. Its container is this paragraph, and it only goes that far. And 2, it does not jump onto its own line. As you can see, it's in line with the stuff right before that. So this box is called an inline element. It's an inline element because it's in line with the stuff that comes right before it and potentially right after it. Actually, yeah, there's a period that comes right after it, and it's on the same line. See that? So that's an inline element. You got block elements and inline elements. Those are the 2 very important sorts of elements that you need to understand. And the only 2 differences, well, the 2 major differences between them are that block elements stretch all the way across and push things onto their own line, before and after. Cool? And inline elements don't. What's a list of inline elements and block elements? Well, if you go to this page, you'll see some content sectioning things. These are all block elements. Text content, I think these are all, nope. I was going to say these are all inline elements, but they're not. Actually, none of these are. Inline text semantics. There we go. These elements are inline. And then there's other stuff. Cool. So yeah, some things are inline, some things are block. Which ones are which? You'll just have to put one on a page and see. Yes.
So inline is sensitive, and block is insensitive to some degree.
I don't
To
know.
white space. The white space. Like white space, you can't have it with the inside. It's not on the inside, right? White space doesn't matter to block.
We haven't talked about spacing, but we'll talk about it very shortly. But yeah, there are different rules about what each one can do and what each one cannot do. Yeah. All right. So I think that I've gotten to the point where we understand the difference, block, inline. So let's talk about that spacing. Let's go straight into it. Any questions online? No. So as I've highlighted these things, you've seen some different colors. For here, you see blue and orange. Blue and orange, blue and orange, blue and orange. I go down to this OL, we see blue, orange, and green. See that green on the left? So what do all those mean? What are those colors? If you ever want to find out what those colors are, you scroll down to the bottom of your styles element, and here we go. The box model, the visual representation of the box model of an element. This OL has 16 margin on the top of the bottom. It has 0 border. It has 40 padding on the left, and then it has a content dimension of 796.667 by 66. So that's the measurements for this box. So you can find out exactly what those are right there. List items inside them. It's the same width, but it's a different height. 22, go figure. 22 times 3 is 66, and that's how tall the OL is, right? Because there's 3 list items inside it. So all that measurement can be found right there. So what's the difference between margin, border, padding, and content? Content is pretty straightforward. The content is defined as stuff that's inside it. For block elements, the content tries to be as wide as it can, whereas the height is simply as much as what's inside it. That's the default. But you can change that around. You can change how tall you want the box to be and how wide you want the box to be. You can do that with CSS. Margin is the spacing outside of the element. So that is to say, this heading and paragraph are spacing each other away from each other. An interesting aspect is as I hover between H1 and P, do you see that there is some overlap between the bottom margin and the top margin? See that overlap there? That overlap is an aspect of margin. And it's the only thing that vertical margin can do. When you have 2 elements that are not spaced out by any padding or border or anything, when all there is margin between them, that margin overlaps, but only vertically. Horizontal margin works a different way. Vertical margin, top and bottom, those things overlap when they kind of meet up with each other. So that's something worth understanding, and something that if you're tearing your hair out over why isn't the CSS spacing itself out the way I told it to, this is one of those reasons why. So keep this in mind. Cool. So that's why there is space between these things. So where does that space come from? Where does that margin come from? Well, it comes from these really weird rules in Chrome. If you look at this in Firefox, then you're going to see different rules. You're going to see like margin top and margin bottom, which is a lot more sane and regular as to how margin really works. I don't know what WebKit margin before really means. It's really just a fancy way of talking about the top margin of an element, and WebKit margin after means the margin below it. Once we start creating our own margin properties, which we'll do in this class, we'll understand a little bit more about how to actually provide our explicit specific margin for specific things. But something you might notice is that as you go throughout the web, you'll see these little things like WebKit dash all over the place. You don't have to worry about this until much later on in the class, but they're considered vendor prefixes. And WebKit is just the fancy name for the rendering engine behind Google Chrome, well, behind Safari and kind of behind Google Chrome. Safari and Google Chrome are very similar in how they're coded. They both use a very similar engine, quote unquote, that is responsible for laying stuff out on the page and painting it. That is to say, actually putting the pixels on the page the right way. And it's called WebKit. Chrome's is called Blink. It's based off of WebKit. So you'll sometimes see WebKit stuff. Don't worry about it. It's more confusing than you really need. But anyway, as you can see, an H1 has 0.67 em on the top and the bottom, and a padding and a margin. A paragraph has 1 em on the top and the bottom. What's em? Em really actually stands just for em. What that means is it's a measurement. There's such thing as an en dash or an em dash. It's essentially referring to the height or the width. I always wonder if this is an urban legend or not, and then I go to Wikipedia. I think it's correct. It refers to the height or width of a capital letter M in whatever sort of font you're using. So when we say 1 em, we're basically talking about like the line height of, or the font size of a certain thing. So by saying 0.67 em on the top and the bottom, we're saying that for every heading, there is 67% the height of a single line of that heading on the top and the bottom. So that means that this height right here, 44, 0.67 of that is 21? That's not right. That's more like 50%. Isn't that right? Well, huh? What? No. See, no, margin. This is not 67% of 800. No. So anyway, 67% there, 1 em there. That essentially means that the, wait, does this make sense? No, that doesn't make sense either. Oh, you know what? Forget about it. This 22 is more than 16 because this text is 16-point text. It is 16 pixels, like, if you go into your word processor, you choose font size, it's 16 pixels here. But the height of the line is 22 because the default line height of certain stuff on the page is a little bigger, about like 1.4 of the actual text. So regardless, the margin here, 16, is equivalent to the font size. And right here, this top margin here is equivalent to 67% of the font size. So if you divide this by 67%, you'll get the actual font size of the H1, which is 2 em, which means it's 2 times the regular stuff, which means it's 32. 32 is twice 16. So there you go. Confused by numbers yet? Great. Okay. So and then we go down the page. OLs also have margin before and after. They also have WebKit padding at the start. Really, why don't you just say padding left? I don't know. But there's exactly 40 pixels of padding on the left of ordered and unordered lists. That's just kind of a hard-coded number, 40. Yes?
I have view wrap on my editor to give my margin. Does that do the margin?
Word wrap?
View wrap.
I don't know what view wrap is. I've never heard of it.
That's what I have to use to keep my text editor from down my text to one all the way.
That's word wrap, and it has nothing to do with this. No. Yeah, that's just what's happening in your text editor. It doesn't affect what shows up on the web. So yeah, here we are. There's that. Another thing is that the body itself has 8 pixels of margin on all 4 sides. So if you were wondering why this H1 isn't stretching all the way across, it's because the body has margin on the left and margin on the right, which is kind of squeezing it in a little bit. Weirdly enough, you see how this body doesn't start at the very top, but this H1 does? Remember I talked about how margins overlap each other? The fact that this H1, even though it's inside the body, the fact that this H1 has more margin than the body outside of it means that it's pushing its own parent down. And that's really wacko stuff. I don't really expect you guys to have to understand this until we talk about CSS months from now. And you probably won't all be there when we talk about that. So don't worry about it. Cool. So there's that. Body has margin 8 pixels by default. So if you really want stuff to show up in the very, very, very upper left corner of the page, you get rid of the margin on the body. So we could do that inside the CSS file. We could say body margin 0. Let's go ahead and start typing. Why not? Here's what I'd like you guys to do. If you've downloaded the materials from last week, then I simply want to make you to make a copy of the folder that you were working on last week and call it class 2 or call it whatever you want. You know, CSS selectors, however your nomenclature works, whatever. I'm just going to go ahead and create a copy so we can start working on new stuff. Or you can keep working off of the last week's stuff. I don't really care. But you know, don't be surprised when when the stuff that you were working on last week all of a sudden looks like stuff you worked on this week because you didn't make a copy of last week's stuff. That's fine. Okay, so another thing I should do is I want to go ahead and close everything from class 1 because you're going to start making changes to class 2 stuff and reload the page. And nothing's going to happen because you've still got class 1 open, right? So close class 1. I'm going to close it in my text editor as well. Let's go ahead and start fresh. Well, not start fresh, but start with a copy in class 2. Make sure you see class 2 or whatever you named it in the URL, the address bar up there. That means you've got the new stuff that we're going to change around. All right, so hopefully you made a copy by this point. Let's go ahead and add some more CSS to this page. Let's just keep these developer tools open as usual. And what do I want to do? I want to make this, my first website heading look a lot more stylish, or at least look a lot different. I'm not really going to do any design, professional design work right now because I can't be bothered. So I'm just going to go ahead and make this H1 look different. First thing I want to do is introduce a whole bunch of different ways that we can change the box model around. First thing I'm going to introduce is very simple stuff, width and height. You can control the width and the height of block elements. You can't as easily control the width and the height of inline elements because inline elements are only really supposed to be as wide and as tall as the stuff inside them. So trying to stretch it out any further, it's not going to work. So you can't really apply width and height to something like this A here and expect it to look any different. But everything else on the page is fair game. So I'm going to go ahead and select the heading. Let me just go ahead and open my class 2 folder. If you want to open up an entire folder in Sublime Text or a similar thing like Atom, Brackets, or Visual Studio Code, you just go ahead and do File, Open, choose the entire folder you want to open, like this whole thing, and just press Open. And this sidebar appears on the left, showing all the available files in that folder. It's pretty cool. So I want to go ahead and make the H1 have a width of 200 pixels and a height of 200 pixels. It's not good enough for me to just say height of 200, width of 200. You have to specify the units, the unit of measurement, which in this case is pixels. There's other measurements like ems. You can use percentages. You can use inches and centimeters even. You can use a whole bunch of different measurements, but you can't just leave it like 200 because it's going to go 200 watts and it's not going to apply anything. Cool. So if you make those changes inside class 2 folder, not inside class 1, but the class 2 folder, then you'll see now that this H1 looks like it's the only thing on the page. Scroll down, there's the other stuff. Check it out. This H1, its content is now exactly 200 by 200. See that right there? I highlighted 200 by 200. Because I said I want a height of 200 by 200. And I got it. Cool. So what happens if my first website is really, really long? Like, my first website, my first website, my first website, over and over and over. That's what happens. Hooray! You just learned about CSS. So this H1 has been set at a height of 200 and a width of 200. If any of the inline content inside it, like all this text, overflows it, it's just going to go right outside of it. It's not going to push other stuff down. It's just this inline stuff is just going to keep on going, and the rest of the page is going to pretend like nothing happened. So if you don't want that to happen, then if you do want your heading to just stretch out based on how much stuff is inside it, then don't set a height. Now you can see that all the other stuff goes underneath it because we didn't specify a height for this heading. This height is now 962 and it's determined by how much content is inside the H1. But the moment you specify an explicit height, that stops working, and now you've got weird overflow stuff going on. So you might want to think twice when it comes to adding a height to something when you don't need to give it a height. Because if the text inside it is supposed to determine how tall it is, no height's necessary. But what if, let's just reload this page. What if we want to control how much space is directly between this hello and my first website? If we can't use height, then what can we use? Well, remember I talked about space between elements, that's margin. So I'm going to get rid of this height here. I don't want to specify a height of 200. I'm just going to comment this out so you guys can take a look at it later if you want. Commenting it out basically just removes it. The browser just glosses right over it, pretends it's not there. That's just for us to look at later. Cool. So my first website has a width of 200, margin on the top, margin on the bottom, a lot of margin on the right, which is really just kind of the effect of an element not stretching all the way across the page. It's just trying to make sure that nothing else shows up on the right of it. So, you know, that's just the way I like to think about it. All this orange area is just the margin around this element. So, with the width of 200, but not a specific height, how do we increase the distance between our heading and whatever goes below it? We set a margin bottom of something. Let's say we want to have a margin bottom of 5em. 5em means 5 line heights. Or not line heights, but 5 font size heights. So the font size is 32 because it's 2em of the regular font size, which is 16, then that means it's going to be 32 times 5. I can't do math. 32 times 5 is 160. So margin bottom should be 160 because it's 5 times 2 times 16. All right, let's see how it looks. Check it out. Looks like it did before, but now there's going to be this exact amount of space between this heading and whatever comes below it because we said margin bottom is 5em. Go down to the bottom, look, 160, just like I said. Again, that's 5 times 2, which is the font size, times 16, which is the base font size. So that's 160. 200 width, 160 margin, 74 height just because it's got 2 lines of text. That's 32 times 2. No, it's not. Sorry, it's line height, which is more than 32 times 2. Yeah, something like that. 74 divided by whatever that is, 36. No, 37. 37. There you go. Great. I can do math. Cool. Okay. So we get how that works. We get how that works. Now, why would we want to add padding to this equation? What good does padding do? Let's add some bottom padding really quick, just so we can actually type it in right here. 20 pixels of padding. Why not? Great. Now there's 180. There's this green area, and there's that orange area. But why does that matter? When it all comes down to it, it's just all spacing, right? So why would you combine padding and margin? Because of borders and backgrounds. You want to control the amount of space within a box and also outside of a box. The reason for that is because boxes can be given backgrounds. Boxes can be given borders. And those borders define the boundary between what's inside and outside of it. So let's give this heading a border of 5 pixels solid periwinkle. Is that a real color? What? No! Oh, did I forget something? No, I didn't. Periwinkle's not a color? That's so dumb. Let's find another great color. That's like one of my favorite things. Can't believe periwinkle's not. Okay, whatever. Okay, what's a color like periwinkle? Powder blue. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Here we go. Light steel blue. That's pretty periwinkle. Great. We can say light steel blue with uppercase LSB, or we can just say light steel blue. Now, question. Are we really limited to the list of web colors on this page? No, we are not. Web colors can be written using hex triplets or shorthand hex triplets or RGB values or a whole bunch of different ways of representing color. Let's talk about it really quick while we're at it. Let's reload this page and see, look, this heading now has a 5-pixel solid light steel blue thing. But what is light steel blue? Light steel blue happens to be B0C4DE. Now what the hell does that mean? B0C4DE is the hex triplet representation of this color. Let's explain a few things. This is something you should know. Hexadecimal. Hexadecimal is a numbering system that goes from 0 to 16 before you reach the next digit, essentially. So instead of going from 0 to 9, you go from 0 to 15. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Then 16 is essentially 10.
I thought it was C with an F.
Yes. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, D, E, F, and then 0 again. So because we've run out of numbers on our keyboard, we referred to A as 10, B 11, C, D, E, F, which is 15, and then 1, 0, which is actually 16. So that's weird, right? But if you think about binary, where it's 1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, that whole sort of thing, like hexadecimal is really just a way of numbering without not using decimal, using hexadecimal instead, 16. So why do we use 16? Because the amount of different shades of red, green, and blue that you can choose from, there's 256 of each of them. 256, including 0.
Oh.
Why 256? Because 256 is the power of 2. It's 2 to the, I don't know, something. I don't care. 2 to the 8th? 2 to the 8th. There you go. Is that correct? Yes, 2 to the 8th. Great. So there you go. So again, what does this mean? When we say FF, C0, CB, we're referring to hexadecimal values from 0 to 255. That's 256 values. FF is 255. And that refers to the red value. C0, I don't know, that's something. And that refers to the green value. And then CB is the blue value. RGB. Just remember that, red, green, blue. RGB. So when we have a color like this, which is FF0, C0, CB, those are very high values. This is the highest value, so you can tell that it's going to be some sort of shade of red. There you go. So there are a lot of, oh, it's funny, it's got a color picker. Oh, that's awesome. Ooh, subpixels. Cool. Yeah, so that's kind of how it works. You don't need to memorize how to create colors off the top of your head. You can use an online color picker. You can use, on macOS, you can use the digital color meter, which comes with macOS, that allows you to specify different values. You just change the display value to hexadecimal. You can do it a whole bunch of different ways. You don't have to use hexadecimal. You can use an RGB function, which we'll talk about sometime later. You can use those web color names, like all of these. Those are all respected by all browsers. Interestingly enough, Orange wasn't introduced into the web color language until the second time around. So really, 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 really old web browsers from like 1994 don't understand what Orange is, which is kind of funny. Yeah, so anyway, that's colors. Okay, great. So now we've got a light steel blue 5-pixel border around here. And as you can see, the margin goes outside of that border. Because as you can see from here, we've got border of 5 on all 4 sides. margin on the top and the bottom, and then we've got content. We have no padding. But if we have padding, then obviously it's going to be inside that border. So let's add a padding of 1M. Now I didn't specify a padding top. I didn't specify a padding bottom or a padding left, padding right. I just specified padding, 1M. If you specify just padding and then a single value, it's going to apply to all 4 sides of the box.
Why is it, because of the CSS, you don't have to have a doc type startup?
Doc type is a thing that only works in HTML. It's not necessary for anything else. There's no need to determine what kind of doc type this file is, because it's already loaded up with a rel of style sheet here, so the browser already knows that it's CSS. So here we go. My first website. It's got 1M of padding on all 4 sides, which equates to 32. That's the font size. It's got a border of 5, and it's got margin on the top and margin on the bottom. Where does that margin top come from? Well, that just comes from this built-in user agent style sheet margin before thing. But the margin bottom comes from here. Oh, interesting. See here that height is crossed out as 200? It seems to have read the comment and provided it right there for us to uncheck in case we want to see how that works. That's really interesting. So every time we load the page, this will always show up as unchecked because we surrounded it in a comment right there. That's very interesting. Neat. So it's just a place for you to go in there and change it around. Of course, when it comes time to actually putting this page on the internet for all to see, you might consider getting rid of certain comments because they're not really important for other people to read. People on the internet, they don't care about reading the comments in your code, so you might consider stripping them out. There are automated ways of doing that. Talk about that some other time. Yeah, so there we go. This element specifies specifically how wide its content should be, what its padding should be, what its border should be, what its margin should be. And those are all the measurements that you can use. Until we talk about CSS positioning, which we'll talk about in a few months. That's an entirely different thing. But for right now, this is the way that you can space a thing out, give it some breathing room, give it a border, give it margin, do all that sort of fun stuff. Yeah, cool. Oh yeah, in addition to border, let's give this thing a background to make it a little bit more apparent of where that box is, what that box is doing. Let's give this a background of white, because we got a background for the HTML of pink. We could also say background of #FFF, which is shorthand for FFFFF, which is red, green, blue maximum, which is white, right? So let's keep it like that. Cool. All right, nice and visible now. And then here's stuff underneath there. And that was simply done by adding a background of FFF to this H1. Cool, cool. I'd like to do a few extra things. I want to get rid of the body, the margin around this entire body. Like I said, built into the user agent style sheet, the body has a margin of 8 pixels. That seems very arbitrary. It seems like a little bit of like, cute built-in padding, or built-in margin, if you will. Let's get rid of that. How do we get rid of that? What do we do?
Set the body equal to none.
Yeah, so we have to create a new CSS rule, body. We need to specify 0. Do we have to specify units here? Do we have to specify 0 pixels, 0%, 0 inches, 0 centimeters, 0 m? We don't need to. 0 is 0 in every unit of measurement. So you never have to specify the unit of measurement when you use 0. So margin 0 is perfect. That's going to get rid of the margin on all 4 sides. So now the H1 and all the other elements are sitting at the very, very left of the page. The H1 is not sitting at the very left of the very top of the page because it's got a margin top of its own. So how about we undo that margin top? Let's make it so it's at the very, very top of the page. So margin top 0. Now it's at the very top of the page. So that's all well and good. Makes sense. Margin top is 0, margin bottom is 5M, right? But there's a little bit of duplication here. A little bit. I'm saying margin twice. I mean, of course, I'm referring to different parts of the margin, but I'm still saying margin top and margin bottom. Wouldn't it be nicer if I could just sort of combine this into a single thing? I can do it. Now this is going to be really weird, but here's how it looks. All right, I'm confusing you guys. Margin is 0, 0, 5M. This is you should not understand this at this point. If this doesn't make any sense to you, good. Really quick, any questions online? Oh yes, cool. He's got what WebKit indicates. Cool. All right. Oh, we do. Sorry about that. Just gonna comment out all these lines. Sorry about that. You do have to comment out all the other margin bottom, margin top things. Actually, as long as margin is underneath those things, it's going to override them. But yeah, let's just comment them all out. So it works. As you can see here, margin 0, 0, 5M. But what does 0, 0, 5M mean? What do the two zeros entail? 5M obviously means the bottom, but how does it know that? Well, let's talk about the margin property. Let's talk about some other properties in CSS, including padding and border width and a few other ones. You can specify multiple values to a single property. What do I mean by that? You see how there are 3 values here, 0, 0, and 5M. When you specify multiple values, you're referring to different sides of a box. So in this case, we're referring to 3 different sides. Well, why 3? I thought there were 4 on a box, right? So where's the 4th? Let's talk about it. You specify 1 measurement, and this is going to be 0 on all 4 sides. You specify 2 measurements, and it refers to the vertical and then the horizontal. So margin 0, 500 pixels, means that the margin on the top and bottom, those are the verticals, is going to be 0, whereas the margin on the left and the right is going to be 500 pixels on both sides. When you specify 3 measurements, it refers to top, horizontal, and bottom. So 3 means you can specify the top, you can specify the sides, that's 0 on both sides, and then 5M on the bottom. So that's what that means. You can also do 4. So let's say top, right, bottom, left. Think of it as going clockwise from the top. 12 o'clock, just make 1 revolution there. So if we wanted to specify all 4 sides, we could say margin is 0, 0, 5M, 0, right? 0 on the top, 0 on the right, 5M on the bottom, 0 on the left. Counterclockwise, sorry, clockwise, not counterclockwise. But we don't have to specify both the left and the right because they're the same. So just specifying 0 right in the middle there applies to both the left and the right. So that's why we can use 3 measurements here. So that's pretty complicated. That's a little confusing. But here's a little key that'll help you out. 1 measurement sets all 4. 2 measurements are vertical and horizontal. 3 measurements are top, horizontal, or left and right, and then bottom. And then we've got top, right, bottom, left for all 4 measurements. And that's how it works. Notice that there are no commas in between these measurements. There's just spaces. Cool. So, oops, I didn't mean to save. I meant to reload. That works. Any questions? Does that make sense? Let me go ahead and hide this guy's questions since I think he got them answered. Goodbye questions. Okay. Where are we at? I think that I've pretty much described as much box model stuff as I need to describe. You guys see how padding works, see how margin works, how you can get rid of margin, how you can set margin on all specific sides. You can do the same thing for padding. If you want to, you can do the same thing for border points in different places, but that's a little bit too complex for right now. Yeah, so there's that. Now, let's talk about styling. Sorry, let's talk about selectors. Sorry, we're already talking about styling. Let's talk about selectors. We'll take a little jump into there, actually. I'm going to take one. All right, selectors. We have 4 selectors in our CSS file right now. HTML, body, H1, A, sorry, 5, and list item. 5 selectors, 5 rules, each one with a selector. So of course, again, a selector selects the elements on the page that are meant to be styled. Now, you're going to run out of elements very fast. What if you have 2 lists? Let's say that, let's put a second list on this page. I'm going to have ordered list number 2. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So it's nice and all, good and great and all well that each one of these has, you know, they're all green and bold and italic and everything, but I think that they're pretty terrible. So why don't I restrict this mayhem to only one of those lists? Well, that's not going to do so well because I said that all ordered lists, or all items on the page, that is, are going to be, you know, green and whatever else. So even though I change this to like an OL, or sorry, a UL, it's not gonna really help out. Change it to a UL, the numbering goes away, but the list items are still green because I said that any list item on the page, regardless of where it is on the page, whether it's inside a UL or OL or anything, we're all gonna be green, italic, bold. Okay, well, how do we fix that? There are a few different ways we can fix that. I want to restrict this styling to the ordered list and not the unordered list. So one thing I can do is say OL, LI. OL, LI. Ollie, if you want. You see that there's a space here. That space is very important. You can't just do this. That doesn't make any sense. There's such a thing as Ollie. But OL space LI means the LI inside an OL. Any LI that is inside an OL will get this styling applied to it. So this space, read it from right to left. The space means LI inside OL. Got that? So let's see it work. Save this, go back over here, check it out. The numbering is the list items inside the UL don't have that styling applied to it anymore, whereas these do because we said OL space LI. So that space means inside. Just think of it that way. And think of it as inside switched around, right? LI inside OL rather than OL inside LI. It's not that. Got it? Make sense? Cool. That's all well and good. I want list item number 1 to be a lot more prominent though. I want everyone to know that it's a list. I want it to be a little bit more apparent than all the other ones, that it's the first item. Well, there is a way in CSS that I can specify the first item, but let's tone it down a little bit. I'm going to introduce you guys to classes. So, what are classes? Classes are attributes you can apply to any element in your HTML file. Let's take a step back. What's an attribute? We see some attributes already. This is an attribute, href, rel, target, href again. Those are all attributes. So what makes an attribute? It is a combination of something equals something else in quotes inside an opening HTML tag. Or a single HTML tag, as this link tag doesn't have a closing link tag. It's just there. See? So it never shows up inside a closing tag. It's always inside the opening tag. You can see that it's before the end of those brackets there. So we've got href and target. Those are attributes. So the class attribute looks like this. Of course, you can put anything you want inside here. I would recommend that you do not put spaces inside the class value until I tell you to, because they mean something special. But anything else, dashes, underscores, make it all one thing, first list item, it's up to you. Name it however you want. You can use dashes, you can use underscores. Most people I know use dashes, but it's just one way of doing it. There's nothing set in stone. But here we go. The class names that I would recommend, I recommend that you use class names that are that describe what the role of the element is on the page, or some sort of special circumstance that the element is in, like whether it's currently the active element, whatever that means, or whether I'm not sure. Whatever sort of role it plays on the page. This class, this list item has a class of first list item because that's very descriptive of what exactly it is and why exactly it's going to get special treatment. And this treatment can come in the form of CSS or JavaScript. JavaScript can also make use of classes to cause certain elements to behave a certain way. We'll talk about that later on. But right now, giving this a class of first list item means that we can select it. We can write a selector that selects this specific element and causes it to look a certain way. And it looks like this. Other than first list item, can someone tell me what's special about this rule that they haven't seen before? There's a period at the beginning. This period at the beginning denotes a class name. So whenever you see a period in your selector, it means class. Select something with a specific class. In fact, as you can see here, I'm not even selecting an li. If I wanted to, I could. I could say li.firstListItem. I could say ol.li.firstListItem. This is basically saying select only the li inside an ol, and the li must have a class name of first list item. But that's a little bit too restrictive. I like to make my CSS as kind of permissive as possible, or as general as possible, and not have to be any more specific than I need to be. Specificity is something that is very powerful in CSS. You can zero into a very, very specific element in a lot of different ways. But if there's only one element on the page that fits the role of first list item, it only has that class, then you're good. You can just do it that way. So font size 3M, that's going to blow it up 3 times. Let's take a look at it. Wow. He even kind of pushed the number all the way to the left. That's weird. But there you go. First list item has a font size of 3M. OLLI has a color of green, italic, and bold. So now we have 2 rules applying to the same element because they're both selecting it in different ways. That make sense? This li here fits both the criteria of being an li inside of OL and having a class of first list item. So all of those rules, all of those declarations, properties apply. So now you can start to see how CSS can be very flexible and very powerful, because you can select all kinds of different things that match different sorts of criteria and mix and match the styles all throughout your entire document, right? All right, so we've learned how to do descendant selectors. We've learned how to do class selectors. So let's do some other stuff here. Let's add another class to a few different things. Let's say that I'm going to say my first website special and special. Hold on a second. I added the class special to 2 different elements. Can I do that? Yep, you can do that. Think of the word class. You're putting something under a certain class. That doesn't mean that it's a class all of its own necessarily. You can use class as many times as you want. You can apply the class element, the class attribute of class special to every single element on this page if you wanted to. Of course, they wouldn't be special anymore, but you know, like they would still have all that class. And if you wrote a selector that applied to that, then every single one of those would get that result. So let's say that things with the class of special are going to have I don't know. What do we want them to have? Want to change their color, their width, their weight, their, I don't know. I don't care. Background. Sure. Yeah, actually, that'll be good. So let's say that special has a background of yellow. Actually, if it has a background of yellow, I should probably say something like highlighted or something like that, but whatever. Please note that I pulled the word special out of thin air. I could have used anything I want. You can, the words first list item and special have no significance in the world of CSS or HTML. They're words that I made up. You can call your classes whatever you want. Here we go. My first website and my favorite website. Check it out. They're both special, so they have a background of yellow. Now check this out. This H1 no longer has a background of white. Why is that? Because this special rule came further down in style CSS than H1. Also, I think specificity-wise, a class selector is more specific than an H1 selector. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. So even if they weren't, even if they were in a different order, I think that this class rule would win out. There is a concept of specificity. So just saying up here, if I move this above H1, yeah, it would still be yellow. Because even though it's on line 11 and this is on line 15, class specificity is more important than element specificity. If you really want to read up on CSS specificity, you can. I guess MBN has a good article on it. Increasing specificity, type selectors, class selectors, ID selectors. So there you go. And then there's other sorts of things, important exception. You can learn about how it's specifically calculated. I don't know how to do that. I just know that class is more specific than heading. I'm sorry, than type or element type, element name. Cool, so there we go. They're both yellow. Now, what if I want this to be special? This here's a list thing. That's going to be a problem, right? Because this already has a class of first list item. So how can I make this special? Check it out. Simple as that. Remember I talked about not using a space in the class attribute until you know what you're doing? Now you know what you're doing. The space separates out multiple classes. You can add multiple classes to a single element by putting multiple classes inside the class attribute separated by a space. So now this li is certainly special because it has 3 rules that apply to it. OLLI, first list item, and special. Oops, wrong button. There we go. It's got a yellow background. Why does the yellow background start right there? Because the OL inside it has padding left of 40, which means that there's 40 pixels where the LI does not have a background because that's not part of the LI. It's being pushed out by the padding of its parent OL. Smells good, I think. Cool. Right, so now, as you can see, look at all this stuff that applies to it. Special list item OLLI. You can say you see exactly where in the code it applies. You can see that nothing's overriding each other. It's all just combining to make a big spectacle of this first list item here. Good stuff. Let me see, what else do we want to talk about? What other sort of selector stuff should I teach you? Here's one. I think that this LI is very special. So special, in fact, that I want to say that list items that are special are also going to be rotated. This is very new, modern CSS. I don't recommend using it since it's not going to work in every browser out of the box. But I think if I did this correctly, then this li.special is going to be rotated by 45 degrees. But there it is. It's rotated along its axis, which is right in the center of the page. So that's why it's doing what it's doing. That's weird. But it works, right? So why isn't it applying to this or that? Oops, or this? Because we specified that only a list class of special will have a transform of rotate 45 degrees. So, you know, if I wanted to have two of them do the same thing, I can say this one's also special. Now, because this is also rotated 45 degrees, it's kind of been removed from where it's supposed to be. It's all the way up there because it's been rotated, turned around significantly.
Is this something you could do with like backgrounds?
Huh?
Is this something you could do with backgrounds?
I'm not doing this to a background. I'm doing just a background. No. If you can't just rotate the background without rotating all the stuff that's inside it because it's just part of the box. If you wanted to do that, you could create another box inside that has the background that is a sibling to everything else that's inside said box, said container box, and rotate that around, and all the stuff inside it would not rotate. So the idea is like full-on container, box that rotates inside that container, and all the other content not inside the box that rotates, but is sibling to it. So it's a little bit of a weird nesting situation. If you want to learn how to do that, we can work on it. But yeah, you can, but not this way. Yeah, so we've definitely messed up this page a whole lot. But as you can see, this is just demonstrating how selectors work. Why is this special thing rotated? Because the other ones are not, but the other special things like these two are not rotated? Because we only said that list items that are special are transformed. And this is both a list item and has a class of special. What about something that is inside a UL and a list item and has a class of special? Looks like this. Let's say it's going to be color is red. Actually, no, let's say box shadow. It's going to be 0, 0, 50px red. I'm not going to talk about the specifics of box shadow right now. We'll do that in a later class. You can learn about all these different CSS properties if you want, but I'm talking about selectors now. So what does this mean? Can someone tell me what this specifically means? Yeah.
Elements that are special in the unordered list?
Yes, and specifically list items that are special inside the unordered list. Exactly. So which element should that apply to? The diagonal one? The second diagonal one, right? Because that is the special one inside the UL, not the special one inside the OL. And there you go. See how this has a box shadow, a red box shadow that's 50 pixels? So there you go. You can make things glowy with box shadow. That's pretty cool. That's our really weird, wacky looking page. And we won't learn until much later in the class how to actually use these rules and styles for good, but in the meantime, we have this. What I do plan on doing, having just said that, I should mention that pretty much most classes, except for these initial ones, we are going to be working on something that is meant to really apply to the real world. You know, something that you can actually go ahead and like say, oh, that's why it applies, because, you know, or how it applies to an actual real project. Once we start making little JavaScript things, we're going to create little apps and see how those apps can actually be used and be useful. Once we start talking about CSS again, every class that I teach is actually going to have us like kind of work toward making something that looks like something that you could actually put on the internet. Right now, I would not recommend putting this on the internet, but you know, it's up to you. Do whatever you want. So, we have to, just to recap, this is a descendant selector because it's saying any list item anywhere inside an OL. This is a class selector, anything that has a class of first list item. This is also a class selector. This is a combination element and class selector. It has to apply to that element with that class. Inside the list item, that would look like this. Do you see what the difference there is? Can you tell me the difference between this and that?
That's two things. You put it together, it means it's pathing, it's all inside path.
Same element. So
List items that are also special.
list items that are also special. And this is things with the class of special inside the list item. Remember the space. The space always means inside. So let's take a look at that. Let's go ahead and put something here. If you like Big Bang Theory, get a better taste in shows. So here we go. Bazinga. Sorry, that was really mean. That's my mean side showing through. I apologize. Anyway, so here we go. Strong. Bazinga. As you can see, this is an inline element. So this is on the same line as everything else. But if we say then say that, this is going to apply to an element with a class name special inside a list item. And that only, then since I've added the class of special to a whole lot of stuff, it's only going to apply to this. That's weird. It didn't apply to that. I guess you can't transform inline elements. How strange. Wow, I learned something new today. Okay, well, let's not use transform. Let's use something else. Let's say li special has an of 0.5 because I'm going to be a ghost Bazinga. Said that. Yeah. So here we go. Opacity of 0.5. Opacity is from a scale of 1 to 0. 0.5 is right in the middle, so it's 50% transparent. Here we go. And why isn't it applying to this li class special? It's because of that space, right? This space changes things significantly. This space means that it is anything with the class of special inside the li, whereas this means it's any li with a class of special. See the difference? So let's just make sure li.special, li special. So li.special has a background of yellow. Li.special has a background of yellow. Li space dot special has an opacity of 0.5. It does not have a background of yellow because it's not a list item with that class of special. It's a strong element instead.
So together is and then separate is
inside. Yes, you're right. Think of it as this way. Think of it this way. This means and. You basically put these two things together. This is element and class. This means element with element that contains this, or special inside list item. So that space means inside. There's also or. Think of it this way. You can apply multiple selectors to the same CSS rule. Let's say that we not only want a list item with, a class of special inside a list item to be opacity 0.5, but we also want our h1 to be opacity 0.5. We can do that. Why can we do that? Because we have a comma separating the two selectors. So this rule now has two selectors instead of one. It's going to have the browser look through the page with two different criteria and apply opacity of 0.5. Check it out. This thing is now semi-transparent. Why? Because this rule over here, li space dot special comma h1, applies to it. It's not a list item. It's not special, but it is an h1. Well, I'm sorry, it is special, but it's not inside a list item. So as you can see, it's actually kind of graying this out. So it's all gray. That's because that's not the selector that applies. This h1 is a selector that applies that makes this opacity 0.5. So you have a lot of freedom in how you want to style things. But the big difference, and the thing that really throws a lot of people off, is this space here, which means inside. This comma means or, this or that. And combining these things together means that it's both got a class of special and it's a list item. And this just means it's got a class. And this, of course, just means that it's an element inside another element. And this means it's an element. It's an A. So that's selector language in CSS. Takes a little while to understand. Obviously, I have a little practice assignment that you'll be able to walk through it and understand the whole thing, see how it all works. But I think that's all I have to teach you today. Let's see if I get any questions online. No questions online. Any questions not online? Yeah?
So there's the HTML selector, and I've also seen asterisk.
Yeah, let's talk about the asterisk selector. Asterisk selector. The asterisk selector selects every single element on the page. So if I want to go like this, let's say padding 100 pixels. Oh my gosh, that's going to destroy things. Every single element on the page will have a padding of 100 pixels. Oh my goodness. The head has a padding, the body has a padding, the h1 has a padding, but it's got a padding of 1em, which overrides the padding of 100. This paragraph has a padding of 100. This paragraph has a padding of 100. The A has a padding of 100. That's padding. There's a lot of padding on this page, right? Because every single element now has that padding.
So asterisk means everything.
Asterisk means everything. But if you think about it, it's different than this, because font family on HTML also means everything. Because font family cascades downward to every element. But this property padding does not cascade. That is to say, it does not go down into its children. So if you do want it to apply to every single element on the page, then you can select every element on the page with a wildcard, otherwise known as an asterisk. So that's going to say everything. Or you can just say anything inside a list item. So this means any element, no matter what it is, as long as it is inside a list item. It's not going to apply to the list item itself. It's only going to apply to anything inside of it. So that's one way you can also use wildcard stuff. So let's just put that down there. There we go. This strong seems to be the only element inside any list item on the page. And so it's got a padding of 100 pixels. Isn't it weird that the padding on the top and the padding on the bottom isn't pushing it down at all? It still seems to be on the same line as everything else. That's something worth knowing about inline elements. Inline elements can be given padding, but the top and the bottom padding doesn't really do anything. See how it, if I reduce the padding of this thing, it would move it back to where that is another list stuff is. But all it's really doing is just pushing out that way, not pushing it down or up, because it's an inline element, which means it must be inline with all the other stuff on the same line as it. So that means that vertical padding doesn't do anything. Vertical margin can even be applied to inline elements. I forget. Margin. Oh no, I guess it can. I take that back. Oh, it can't be applied at the top and the bottom. That's weird. Although it kind of is. Yeah, I don't know, whatever. I would be careful applying margin, padding, height with any sort of box model stuff to inline elements. They're supposed to kind of be left alone. But whatever. Yeah, anyway, there we go. That's how we can apply padding 100% to this one, 100 pixels to this one specifically because it's any element inside an LI. So yeah, good question. And there's a whole bunch of other ones. Oh, one thing that people might be wondering about is what about IDs? If you're at all familiar with web development, if you've ever done any web development before, you might be familiar with ID selectors, or IDs specifically. IDs are kind of like classes. You can add like a ID of the list or something, and then you can style it by saying the list. New stuff. So this hash here, not hashtag, but just hash. The list is going to be an ID selector. I don't recommend ever using ID selectors in CSS because there is simply zero reason for using them. No reason whatsoever. Never heard of a valid reason for using them. They can be used, but the downside of using ID selectors versus CSS selectors is that this can only be used once per page. It's not valid to have an ID of the list on multiple elements. So this is the element on the page with an ID of the list. You're not supposed to give that more than once. You can, it's not going to yell at you or give you an error or crash or anything, but you're just not supposed to. IDs are supposed to be unique, whereas classes are not. So if you think about it in CSS, there's no good reason why you want to have a rule that will only apply to one element on the page. I mean, you certainly can. You can use classes, but why use IDs when you can use classes? They're just more extensible. You might find down the line that you actually do want to apply it to two things on the page, and if you're using IDs, then you're up the creek. So you might as well just use class tag, right? So I wouldn't recommend using IDs, although you can. There's no reason for them. I think that's it. Okay, one final check for online stuff. Aha, I just answered your question. I'm answering these questions left and right. Good stuff. Okay, cool, so that's it. On Thursday, I'll be posting the meetup event for the lab last week, but it was posted on Facebook. It was posted into all my mailing lists and everything. So if you didn't come because you forgot about it because you're on Meetup, sorry about that. I'll remember to do that in the future. But yes, on Thursdays at 7 p.m. in the classroom right behind this one, not the one you're in right now, but the Turing classroom. I'm there from 7 till 9 exactly and before 7 probably, to answer your questions about anything related to web development. I'm pretty good at it, so there's that. I also give out an assignment. If you're new or you don't remember from last week or you didn't do it yet, go ahead to this class, click on Keep Informed, one of these buttons, whatever you want, and you will get notified of the assignment that's coming out, or the assignment for this week. Of course, I don't grade you, I don't take attendance, I don't receive your assignment, you don't need to send it to me because every assignment has an answer key, and it's also obviously open book. Go on the internet and find out how to do it. But it's just meant to make sure that you understand this material and you can do the material. So that's what it's trying to walk you through. So please work on that. That's going to help you out. If you don't know how to do it, then you are going to fall behind. Otherwise, Thursday is a great time to get help doing it or just sit down and focus on it. And that's from 7 to 9. Thanks for coming. Remember to donate to NoiseBridge. That's the place you are right now. Stuff some money in that box right over there by the door, or stuff some money into this box and recurring donation, etc. Great. Thanks for coming. See you guys on Thursday, and have a good night.
Thank you.